Welcome to Team Calder's Carp Fishing Masterclass. This is the first in a new series of films for you to keep and collect and refer back to that cover all aspects of carp fishing from all around the world. I'm here at Gigantica, which is a very pressured, very busy water in France. There's huge fish in here, and later on in the film we're going to show you exactly how to catch them. But for now, I'm going to hand you back to some of the other guys in the team who are specialists in their field, and they're going to show you how they tackle commercial day ticket fisheries. So sit back, relax, and prepare to be flooded with loads of carp fishing information.
It's a beautiful summer's day, which means only one thing, the time for a spot of floater fishing. As you can see, the boys are behind me. They're off to a flyer on Hunt's Corner. So what we're going to do now is take you through the do's and don'ts of floater fishing. Firstly, the rod, the Longbow DF Floater Special, and as it says on the tin, it is made for the job. It's 12 foot, 2 1/4, and the thing I love about this is the lovely springy tip. It really does help you enjoy the battle with the fish, but also it complements the reel line that I like to use. The reel is actually a Theory 4000 SP. It's a new one in the range and one that I absolutely adore, but I like to complement it with 30-pound Daiwa tournament braid. Now, a lot of people like to use mono, but I sort of have a balance. I do have the braided mainline, but I also add about 3 rod lengths of 8-pound cruiser control mono over the top. That just gives it a little bit of cushion during the fight. But the reason I use the braid is whether I'm fishing short range or long range, when the fish sort of takes the bait or rolls on the bait and takes it, it instantly sort of makes contact with the rod tip. So on many occasions, I don't even need to strike. On to Big Rich's floater setup, exactly the same rod, but you'll notice here he's got the ballistic reel, another great reel, another option from the Daiwa stable. But the other important thing is Big Rich likes to use mono on his floater rod. He either uses 6 to 10-pound cruiser control. If the lake's weedy or snaggy, then use the higher breaking strain. But if it's quite clear like we've got at Hunt's Corner, you could get away with 8 or 6-pound. And it's all down to personal preference, you know. I like the braid, Rich likes the mono, but it's whatever gives you the most enjoyment. So that's the hardware, lovely bits of tackle that makes the floater fishing a lot more enjoyable. Next stop, rigs. Whenever I see you floater fishing, the interceptor float is a signature part of your approach. Why is that?
That's right, it's just so versatile, Al. If I was visiting a new lake for the first time, that would be on my rod. You can cast it miles, you can draw it back, you can fish sort of halfway out, you can even fish it close in if you want. Never tangles, sits really, really unobtrusively in the water. The fish are happy to feed around that, so it ticks all the boxes for me.
Right, brilliant. And the great thing is, like you say, whether you're fishing short range or long range, you can actually adjust the size of the float without actually having to cut anything off the line. That just slides off, doesn't it?
That's right.
And then literally with a groove in the line, straight off, and you can put on one of the bigger ones.
Yeah, we do 4 different sizes, so, you know, depending on what range you're fishing, you will find the right one.
Does it actually pay sometimes, because of the bolt effect of something like this? You mentioned it sits low in the water. If you actually have some of the, you know, the bigger bobble at closer range.
Oh, for sure, yeah. I mean, I like to strike. I like to watch the hook bait and strike when I see it disappear. But these floats will work perfectly well as bolt rigs. The little concave bit in the front, and like you say, the bigger ones work even better.
Like using a big lead on the bottom.
Absolutely, yeah.
The same thing, it's increasing the resistance.
There are no rules, you know.
Yeah.
They're there to be cast a long way, but like you say, for the bolt rig purposes, perfect for close-in work if you want to do that as well. Right, this is for very, very subtle, close-in fishing. They go in with the sweetest plop, they don't spook fish, they're very, very unobtrusive. Fish, again, will feed around them quite happily. So, you know, flicking around close in, even singling out individual fish, you know, casting in front of them, drawing it back, that's when I'd go for the cruiser.
Yeah, and maybe on sort of lakes where they've been really pressured off the top, sometimes the more subtle approach with the cruiser over the longer bulbous interceptor, it might pay off. Now, how does this actually go onto the line? It looks very simple, I presume it is.
Well, it is very simple, yeah. All you do is thread your main line down the stem, and then I use a Palomar knot to a size 11 ring swivel, which fits nicely into the rubber grommet in the end of the float there.
That's it, nice and simple. So it's just basically an inline lead, isn't it?
That's right,
yeah. That floats. Right, onto the hook link, because this looks very soft and very supple. So firstly, what's the material and how long do you like to have the hook link?
Okay, that's £9 Guru N gauge, and I like the hook link to be about that sort of long, so 6 foot.
Yeah, 2 foot for my wingspan,
Yeah.
6 foot for yours, yeah.
Yeah, and what I actually do is, just to break up the outline of that hook link, I will grease with Vaseline from about sort of 3 or 4 inches from the float, right the way along the hook link, and sort of terminate it just before the hook, a couple of inches before the hook.
So that just breaks up the line, so those pressured fish don't see that line from the float right
No,
to
that's right, yeah.
Now, I like a side hook bait. Jimmy likes the super glue he's on. I'm not sure, Simon Scott probably has his own preferences. You like to use a hair rig.
That's right.
That's a very small size.
Size 12 mixer.
Okay.
Huge gape for the size of the hook, which is really, really important. But as you pointed out, very, very tiny hair, which actually makes it look a lot like your hook baits.
Yeah.
Does the same sort of thing, hides the hook really well. So very, very tiny hair, just whittle the bait down so it fits perfectly, and that size 12 mixer will hang nicely underneath.
Yeah, it just sits there. And why do you use the hair then?
Basically, when those fish are Pac-Man-ing your mixers out there, and if your hook bait, say, gets damaged or it goes a little bit less buoyant than you want it,
or you want to change colour.
Yeah, or change colour, whip it in, take it off. You haven't got to change your hook, you haven't got to super glue anything. You're straight back out there amongst the feeding fish.
Right, superb stuff. Well, there you go. A look at the rigs that we like to use. Time for some hook baits. The one thing I've noticed when I've watched you fishing on the surface is you tend to like to use a high visual one, don't you?
Yeah, a lot of the time, because when you're fishing at range, I actually like to see the hook bait rather than watching the float pull around when I get a take. I like to just strike as soon as the fish takes that hook bait, and if you're using a drab coloured hook bait in the wind, you're never going to see it. So quite often I'll use a pink one, yeah.
You're not always picking the colour then for the attractor purposes, you're actually picking it for sight purposes.
Exactly, yeah.
Right,
yeah.
okay. Well, this is the first one, a little white chewed down one to, I suppose, mimic the shape of a mixer.
Yeah, exactly that. That works well, obviously, in if the water's a little bit, if the light levels are causing the water to go a bit darker, the white will obviously stand out against that.
Okay. And the pink, that's one that you seem to do really well on when we filmed Thinking Tackle on Hunt's Corner.
Yeah, it worked really well. It was nice and early, wasn't it? I don't think they'd been hammered early that year, so they were looking for sight rather than something subtle.
Yeah, and I remember that particular session, the fish that were actually in your swim, there wasn't that many, and you were, like you say, you were almost striking them as they mouthed it, weren't you?
Yeah, exactly. That was like the cherry on the cake. They quite often take that one before the offering. So
yeah, well, similarly to fishing on the bottom, isn't there?
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
a high visual bait over drab colours, and you get a pick up quicker than, you know, the one that's the needle in a haystack.
Exactly.
Right, and you know, this is the sort of signature, as we say, just as it's glued on there.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I like to have it nice and tight to the shank, so as soon as they mouth it, they're pretty much hooked.
And I suppose this is just when they're absolutely going for it, Jimmy.
Yeah, quite often you'll have to change over to a mixer to mimic the free offerings that you're using, especially when they're becoming wary of the colour baits.
Where you like to have the high visual element almost as a sight,
Yeah.
I like it because they can actually taste it.
Okay.
And if I put that on there, you coat it. You've got two options, Jimmy. You can dry this in the sun
Yeah.
and leave it to sort of settle onto the mixer, but you can add it on when it's wet as well, and that sort of leaks off, and I think it actually covers the hook.
Yeah, I remember you saying.
And you know, we did some recent filming with David Seaman as well, and he'd never seen it really, hadn't done floater fishing for quite a few years, and he was shocked with the intent that the fish were taking these hook baits.
Yeah.
And I do think, you know, if you can find little edges like that where you're actually giving a bit of taste around the orbit of the hook bait,
Yeah.
that's a major plus point. Okay, well there you go, vital points about hook baits on the top. So now it's time to look at the final part of the jigsaw, the bait that we put into the swim to get these fish revved up and ready to be caught. So it's no different to fishing on the bottom. You know, I always talk about the buffet theory, different sizes, different attractors, all sorts of things to get fish excited. Now, here we go. This is a handful of bait, really, just to give you a good idea. I've nicked some of these off our main man, Simon Scott. You've got some bone-shaped dog biscuits there, these bigger, larger morsels, and then some sort of medium-sized pellets, and then the little ones. You know, the little ones are really important early on in the session. I don't like to put them out for too long, but when you're struggling to get the fish feeding, these small ones, get them revved up. You know, they get excited, they get frustrated really when they're eating because they're not getting a massive fix, they're having a good chew, but there's loads of things for them to go at, and that's a great way to get sort of finicky carp feeding off the surface straight away. Now, how do you actually introduce them? Because there are a number of ways. Now, the most common form is the catapult. This is the quarter pole This is a great way of getting them in at short to sort of medium range. You'll see us using the spod quite a lot. This is the Skywinder. It's got no holes in, so when you want to get it out a little way with light mixers, just put a little bit of water in and it flies out there. And I like to, just before it's about to land, just sort of tap the line and get them to sort of shake the mixers out. And what you actually get with that is 2 lines of bait. You get the bit where the spod lands, so you get a little group further out, and then you get one slightly shorter. So when you're actually bringing that float back, you get 2 bites at the cherry, because you can often get 2 pockets of fish feeding, one at short range and one at medium range. And that's why we love the spod, and we've seen it on Hunt's Corner previously that the fish are not alarmed by it in any way, shape or form. If anything, they're excited by the spod. So, you know, have a go with the spod. If the fish are excited by it, keep putting it in. You don't even need the pole. Another way I like to introduce mixers is actually with the aid of a funnel web bag. Now, on some lakes, the fish might be further out, they don't particularly like the spod, and you can't get them out there with a catapult, so the funnel web bag with a little stone inside can come to the rescue, and it actually means you can introduce small and the larger pellets out there, and as it breaks up, they just sort of disperse and the fish come in and have a go at them. So there's 3 ways there to introduce food into your swim when surface fishing. Now, the pièce de résistance, I'm hoping we can show you it, but this is a little edge that's come of light in the last year. One of my mates discovered it. It's actually using the raspberry plume goo on the surface. This seems to, you know, really make a difference on days when the fish don't seem to be taking just the sort of natural, unflavoured mixers. What you do, I've got them in here, I'll have, you know, give you a show. You'll see they've just got a slightly red tint to them, and this is really easily done. You add a little bit of water to the bottom of a bucket, just leave it, no mixers in it at this point, and then just quite simply just squeezing a bit of the raspberry plume into the bottom of the bucket, then stir it into the water, get it all mixed up, and then add your mixers. And you're not putting it in sort of neat, because it's watered down. You're getting a nice glaze on there, but it's subtle. It's just enough to get those fish excited, and then you've got the option of sort of fishing a gooed up single mixer over the top, or just a high visual one, something that will still stand out in amongst those attractive pellets. Anyway, less talking from me. About time we did a spot of floater fishing. There's fish all over the surface, and Jimmy and Rich are now sort of going to talk to us about when to bait up, when to cast in, how much bait to put out, all the things that you'll be wondering at home if you're new to floater fishing, because it is an art form. It can be very exciting when you get it right, and it can be very frustrating when you get it wrong. So, how's it looking, boys?
Incredible.
Piranhas? Piranhas on the surface.
There are.
Now, how much bait have you put in, Jimmy, to get this sort of reaction? Like, how many pouch loads of bait do you think?
We put in about between 5 and 10 pouchfuls. It's all about feeding. Oh, there's one coming near it now. It's all about feeding little and often now. There's no point in piling it all in straight away, because obviously that limits your chances of them picking up your hook bait. You want them competing, and the only way to do that is feeding little and often.
Now,
Speaking
Richard,
of which, I've got to do some...
Yeah, some bait. Do you want the good ones?
Please, mate.
Now, you've got... you've done a fair bit of this type of fishing, Rich. When's the right time to cast in? Because that's what a lot of people...
It looks a lot like that.
Yeah, yeah, but there's a lot, on a lot of occasions, people would have put out, say, you know, a couple of pouch loads, got like one fish feeding on the surface, and then suddenly they're casting in their first rod.
It's always hard to restrain yourself, and I think we just about managed it. But when you've got them going and competing and racing for the next floater,
yeah,
you know that's the right time. The backs are surging around on the surface, then get it out there.
Rich, casting at the fish, okay? Someone's new to floater fishing, they might get so excited, see a pack of carp in their swim, munching around, and then end up casting the controller. Oh, he's in, go on, son. You end up casting the float right in amongst them.
Yep.
Now, is that a do or is that a don't?
That is a massive don't. Why spend all that time getting them feeding confidently only to ruin it by plunging your float right amongst them? So
cast past them.
Yeah.
Get the line
10
up in
yards
the air,
past, yeah.
and draw it back
slowly. You can go a bit quicker to start with, but inch it back once you get near the fish.
Here we go. Here we go. Big Bernard's big arms. He's going to lap this one up. Back of the net. Salmon swooped in.
Hey!
How about that? Teamwork.
Quality.
Brilliant.
Well, there you go. Proof of the pudding that the tactics we've shown you are working wonders. Richard's still firing mixers out there and they're having it. So I'm going to chuck another mixer out. Hopefully we'll snare another one.
she goes. Right then, time to talk a bit of fish science with the fish on the top. With human carp, the man has gills for ears. Scotty, now I've got loads of questions.
Guess what's every year?
The links get more tedious. Now, fish feeding on the surface. I've always wondered, is this something that comes naturally for them, or are we making them do something that makes them wary?
Okay, well, carp are a very adaptable animal. I mean, they'll feed, you know, upstairs, mid-water, or on the bottom.
Right, carry on while he...
But yeah, while he's busy,
Yeah.
at least you've got something to watch while I talk. So yeah, they will adapt to feeding, but naturally they feed, they're bottom-feeding fish. Their mouth parts are designed to feed on the substrate, in the mud and the sediment. But if you look at a wild population of carp that aren't being fished for, they will come and take natural food off the top. I can think of a brilliant example on the River Ebro a few years ago. There was a cafe with a really bright halogen light onto the river at night.
Yep.
And millions of moths would gather around it, and at night carp will be coming up and slurping on the moths and taking the moths.
Do you think, right, that a fish gets put into a lake, so it was reared on pellet, was happy chomping off the surface, gets put into another lake, right, and because the other bigger, wiser carp that have lived in there, I don't know, for 20 years, don't feed off the surface, they sort of get programmed like peer pressure not to feed off the top, or am I thinking too much about it?
I think you're thinking too much. I've seen new fish go into a lake that have been surface reared on pellets, and they brought the old fish up that have never fed on the top before.
Right.
So it's like the older fish have gone, hey, well, we can do that.
Look at that.
I too can eat pellets off the surface. So yeah, you were thinking too much, Alex.
Okay, vision. Now, really important, because we all wonder what they can see.
Yeah.
Looking up, what can they see? Can they spot a pink one compared to a silhouette of a chum mixer? Can they distinguish?
I think absolutely, definitely. One of the things, I think the boys have already mentioned this, is chop and change when you're floater fishing. Don't be too blinkered and set in your ways. If something worked one day, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work the next day, so be prepared to chop and change. And I know these guys have certainly experienced it. A little pink pop-up can work brilliantly for a couple of hours and then not work.
Tweaks, work with the swim, the day,
like
the
a match
fish.
angler would, chop, change.
Almost perfect timing. A fish is gone in the net.
Well done.
There you go. A fish in the net and a bit of scientific floater fishing detail from the main man himself, Simon Scott.
Wow, what a perfect way to end a lovely day's floater fishing. 20 pound of chunky Oxford mirror nicked off the surface on the tactics that we've shown you. Just goes to show that if you bait right, use the right rigs and the right tackle, then you can catch these too. What's most important though, is give floater fishing a try, because it's loads of fun.
This is the very essence of close combat carp fishing. It doesn't get any more exciting than this. As far as I'm concerned, this is it. It's exciting stuff, playing a carp. When you hooked it out in the pond, bring it into the net, it's exciting stuff, for sure, don't get me wrong. But that level of excitement is times 10 when you actually see that fish coming in and feeding on your margin spots before you even hook it. It's just brilliant stuff. Now, I've been baiting in here. Come in here at 4 o'clock this morning and I put a bit of bait down here and a little bit on this gravelly run. I'm not sure you can pick it up on the camera. There's fish creeping in. They've been picking up some crumbed up boilies down here. There's a few bubbles coming up. There's 1 or 2 down here. So we're in a little corner of Oxley's Lake, and I reckon we're in with a really good shout of a chance here. Okay, so we've got some fish feeding. It's time to get a rig in the water. Let's have a quick look at the gear I'm using. I've got 12-pound contour, and onto that I've put some little balls of putty up the line to pin everything down. I threaded a 12-pound contour onto the cog system, got a 4.5-ounce lead on there. Short hook link, this is N-Trap soft coated braid, which is at the moment my favourite. And then I've got a size 8 wide gate, a little balance tied up with a single grain of corn just to top it off to make a little close combat carp fishing cocktail. Let's see if it works. You can see that, but the fish that's right into the bank, you can see his mouth going, he's chewing. So he's obviously picked up some bait. You've got 2 fish here on the bait. There's a ghosty out to the right there. Look, he's really going for it on the bottom. You see his dorsal twisting and turning as he feeds. Okay, this could be quite explosive stuff. It's going to be a placed rig. what I've done, I've dropped the rig, lowered the rig really quietly onto the spot. And what I like to do, got a little tiny chance the fish have just drifted out a fraction. What I'd like to do now is just make sure the line's laden well across the bed, and then just pull a bit of slack off. Make sure those little beads of putty are right down on the deck. And what we don't want to have happen is to spook the fish. Now what I'm going to do is get my bucket, and I'm literally going to put 2 or 3 tiny pinches of bait on top of the bait. Okay, so that's the mix I've got. Just put a few grains of corn, I think. There's obviously a bit of bait down there, but I'm trying to target the hook bait if I can. I want to talk through a little bit about some of the techniques I employ when I'm stalking carp. First up, the bait. This is the bait combination that I like to use. So what I'm trying to create is a nice patch of really smelly, interesting bait on the bed of the pond. And there's nothing that's too bright, like a handful of corn stands out as a bit glary, but there's nothing too bright about this. And I reckon that really creates a nice banquet or feast for them. Now, what I like to do when I'm stalking, rather than just plonk that in one spot and then call it a day, is what I'll do is I'll make my way around the lake and I'm looking for overgrown, quiet corners. Now, some lakes are better for this than others. You know, not every single lake I've fished in my life has been a brilliant stalking water, so some of them are better. And we're looking to prime spots, maybe in quiet corners. Now, you've got to obviously bear heedance to the rules of the fishery. If it says only fishing from designated swims, then you've got to stick to that. But a lot of club waters around the country won't have that rule, and you can make your own little stalking poke holes, little corners where most people might ignore them because they can't get a big bivvy in, and those are often the spots I like to fish. Little one-rod spots, perfect, and really exciting for maybe a few hours in a day. So if you're on a limited time, go in there, little bit of bait, maybe go around, bait 3 or 4 other spots, come back to the first one and be looking for signs of fish. That's the way I'd approach stalking. Really mobile, travel light, you know, in for a few hours, catch one and go home and be watching the 6 o'clock news. Perfect. Well, I think I'll gonna move on. I've given it an hour and a half in here, but unfortunately, just after I got the rig in, whether it was the line lay or the position of the rig, but the fish have just melted away. And I'm really aware that, you know, Oxleys there's a lot of carp in here, and if they're in an area you see a lot of them and they've drifted away, they're not here, they're not between me and this island off to my right, so it's very quiet up this end of the lake, and I think the feedback from the rest of the gang is there's a lot down the other end, so it's time for a bit of a relocation, or at least a move.
Okay, so things over at Oxley's slowed right down, and you kind of know when you're stalking, you become quite aware of what happens with fish movement in and out of a swim, and things were clearly not going to happen there. So I had a little bit of a snoop about, no good. So I've come back over to Hunt's Corner and I want to have a little stalk here this afternoon. But before I do, I want to run you through some of the hardware that I've been using in my stalking. Let's start off with a rod. This is a 4-piece 10-foot rod by Daiwa. It's a lovely rod. I like to fish with a shorter rod when I'm stalking for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it lets you get into little poke holes, small spots that would be really quite awkward with a 12-foot or 13-foot rod. And secondly, and this is really significant I think for guys, particularly those on a short time scale, that this rod breaks down, and it's a 4-piece rod, so it breaks down into a 2.5-foot rod bag. So you could have a couple of these beauties in the back of your car, in the boot, completely out of sight while you're at work, not worried that someone's walking off with your kit. Get to the lake and you can walk real quick to a swim with these. You're not carrying big heavy rod holders, so great fan of the rod. Move down to the reel. This is a Daiwa Mcast BR 4000A. Great little reel for this sort of fishing. You don't want to have a massive reel. Yeah, the guys in Team Corder, you know, some of those guys use really big reels, which are fantastic for achieving great distances. But when you're stalking, often you might only have 5-6 feet of line from the rod tip to your trap, and there's just no need to have miles and miles of reel, miles and miles of line on the reel. So, and you've got a small spool, and you've got a lovely free spool facility, so it's got that option if you want to fish like that. And this, it doesn't weigh anything, so you can move really quickly with it, and you're less likely to have a problem with all the line coming off the spool when you're in a tight little corner with a smaller reel. So perfect for this sort of thing. I mentioned the line. This is 12-pound contour, fluorocarbon, and it's absolutely perfect for a stalking job. It sinks well, it's very heavy, so it goes to the bottom of the lake quickly. And on top of that, being a fluorocarbon, it's invisible underwater. So it's got two big advantages there. Firstly, the fish aren't going to see it, and because it sinks to the bottom, it's out of the way when the fish are feeding on your spot. So there you are, rod, reel and line. That's the hardware that I use for my stalking.
Oi, oi, stop there. What have I been catching you doing, you crafty old soul?
Oh, Ali. I'm just being a bit sneaky here. I'm setting a trap. I read about this many years ago. I've got a little spot going quite nicely up under those trees, and I've tried a little old trick that I've used in the past, and it can work really well. So what I've done, Ali, it's complicated.
I'm ready for it. I watched you and I was like, that is mustard.
It is cunning, but it doesn't work in all situations. You've got to be
devious.
It is devious.
Yes.
But yeah, being half man, half carp, you've got to think like a fish.
Yes.
So what I've done, I've gone round the other side. I've had a little spot feeding in the edge. It's a really tricky cast.
You couldn't cast there, mate. It's impossible.
No, the spot I've actually placed the rig is an impossible cast from here. But it's safe. I must point that out. We've not taken any risk.
No, but the canopy of trees there means
you couldn't get
you could
tight
never
to the
get
bank.
the trajectory to drill into there.
That's right. So what I've done, and being an awful caster, I would have just landed it in a tree. So what I've done,
and myself, we would have decorated.
Could be. I'm in. Yeah.
What a setup! Look, I've watched him do it, so I mean, just to give
That's
you
how it works, Ali. Get in there! I didn't even have the buzzer on.
So he's gone over there, cast a marker float back this way with no lead on.
No,
that's right.
Literally, no. There's fish there, Ali. So I'm really conscious of spooking them. It's tricky, always tricky on these shoots with a camera crew trying to get into sort of small spots. It's not easy. So what we did, I went round there and just flicked a marker float, no lead, just out from under the trees, and then came round here and flicked a rod across the marker float. Look at this go!
I don't know why we're still on the floors and on the floor.
I love Hunt's corner fish.
Still staying down like lions.
Biblical scrap. I've hooked it, and the free spool mechanism has been on the marker float rod.
Yeah.
I've reeled it all the way back to the bank.
Yeah.
I've then got myself organised and clipped this rod line onto it, and then reeled it all the way back.
Yeah.
With the cog mechanism on it, but with no lead. Can't have a lead on it, obviously.
Okay, yeah.
So I've reeled it back across the surface, and I've got it right up under those trees. And then I've set up my tackle, so I put a fresh rig on, balanced bait, got it all absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
And then, and I didn't even got the clutch set on the reel. It's all frantic stuff. I got the cog rig all set up, put the balanced bait on there, and then put the putty on the line. Got everything absolutely perfect, and then I positioned it by hand.
Yeah.
Right up against the bank, literally in 2 foot of water on the clean gravel where I could see it. And then using a spare bank stick and an elastic band, I then brought the line from the lead up to the bank stick.
Yeah.
Bit of loop up on the bank stick, and then from the bank stick, which is situated under the trees, right across to the rod, and then you clip the bobbin on, and then hopefully the bite has
well, like that, big spring back.
Yeah, literally, the rod goes slack, the line drops, and you're away.
I'm going to get your net in a second, but you tighten the line as well right up, so you've got that spring back. It's going nothing. There's no line touching the surface. So
ideally, you can do, but there's a few coots and moorhens bobbing about, and also there's some of this
debris,
and I don't want to have what can happen is it can spring back when it's not fish.
Yeah.
I've had that happen in the past, so. And you leap at it and then there's nothing there, and you've spent 10 minutes getting your trap set.
What a method though, Si. This is like proper, like to watch it, because I can see it, this is a reasonably easier venue, but imagine taking it, some of the people watching this with a syndicate, somewhere with small with pressured fish that you
Ali,
can't get.
It's an absolutely fantastic method. You've got no line in the water. The line lay's totally different, rather than, the best caster in the world gets it, let's say Dan, he gets it in there, magic cast, but the